All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Helen Hokinson. I am a program coordinator at Johnson County Library. Welcome to In Conversation with Amber Logan, Adam Simcox, and Richard Swan. Before we move to our conversation, I would like to let the folks who are local to Kansas City that Amber will be presenting Japan from the outside about her book, The Secret Garden of Yanagi Inn, tomorrow evening, 6:30 to 7:30 at the Blue Valley Library. And on Saturday, September 21st, from 9:30 to 11:30, we will be learning about writing retellings, how and why we would want to do that. And you can sign up for that on jocolibrary.org and go to events. We also have several book discussions of The Secret Garden of Yanagi, and if you would like to discuss it with others. So let's get started. Amber Logan is an author, freelance editor, and university professor. She holds a PhD in creative writing from Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge, UK. She doesn't live in the UK, though. She lives in Kansas with her husband, Chris, and two children, Fox and Willow. Willow was adopted from Japan. When she's not writing, editing, and teaching, she loves to exercise, travel, particularly internationally, and read. She is an otaku about everything Japanese. Adam Simcox is joining us from London. He's a London-based filmmaker and photographer who has shot commercials for brands such as the McLaren, Primark, and Unilever, and music videos for Britpop veterans, as well as fresh on the scene alt country stars. He began his film career by writing and directing three features. The first sold to Netflix before Netflix was Netflix. The second and third won awards and critical acclaim at festivals worldwide, and so didn't sell at all. When he's not making films, he indulges the masochistic pain that is being a Spurs fan and keeps up his unhealthy vinyl collecting habit. He lives in London with his wife, a fellow writer, and their two sons. And finally, Richard Swan is a critically acclaimed author of fantasy and science fiction. His debut fantasy novel, The Justice of Kings, which is book one of the Empire of the Wolf trilogy, was an instant Sunday Times bestseller and has been translated into 7 languages. His other work includes the Art of War space opera series and the upcoming fantasy Grave Empire from Orbit Books, coming up in February, as well as short fiction for Black Library and Grimdark magazine. British by birth, Richard currently lives in Australia with his wife and 3 sons. I think to kick off the conversation, we're coming from 3 different countries. Tell us how you all met each other.
Well, I'll go ahead and take that, I guess, since I kind of introduced this kind of panel idea. We actually are agent siblings, which means that we are all from the same agency and the same agent represents all of us. So we actually have a Discord channel that we all chat on, and we share ideas, we commiserate with each other, we celebrate each other's wins. And so, yeah, we just kind of built friendships all around the world because of it. So it's very cool.
Yeah. It's like a weird sort of therapy session, that Discord server, in like a good way. It's like it's much cheaper than therapy, and you get a much quicker response from it. It's been like a power for good. I know our agent hates the existence of this Discord server, by the way. He absolutely hates it. But I've tried to tell him it is a good thing. It's like we're not just going on to slag him off. Like, it's a really positive thing overall.
He's probably the least discussed aspect of it in some ways. He's the only common uniting factor, absolutely. And yet we never talk about him. Bless him.
It's very true. It's very true. Yeah. Yeah. The kind of time to worry, I guess, is if you are being talked about a lot as an agent in that respect.
That's right.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm obviously English, and I lived in the UK for most of my life, but we moved to Australia a couple of years ago. But when I first joined the DHH agency, Adam had, I think you had just been published, hadn't you, Adam? And your first book had just come
Yeah,
out.
the first book. Yeah,
That's right. And we went for a lovely brunch in London
we
and
did. It was
shot
very
the breeze.
civilized, wasn't it?
It was very
We did.
civilized. Yeah. And then Amber came a few years later. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's all right, Amber, isn't it? You came quite fairly recently. Was it last year you joined the
Uh,
agency?
yeah, I'm trying to think. I think it was just about a
The
year
year before?
ago.
Yeah,
Yeah, just a
I
year
lose track
ago.
of time these days.
Yeah.
It's I'm sort of 35 now, and the years have just sort of slipping away into the rearview mirror in a concerningly rapid fashion.
Oh, you're only
Yeah,
35. God,
indeed.
that's depressing.
Yeah, yeah. Wonder Kid, they call me, Adam.
Yeah, and DHH, the literary agency, is actually based in London. So most of
Yes.
the folks in the Discord and most of Harry's clients are based in the UK for the most part. We have a
Mhm.
little smattering. There's a little bit of elsewhere, but it's primarily UK based. So I'm a bit of an odd
Should,
one out.
should we talk about how we sort of came to be published in the first place? That's probably a good place to start, isn't it? And then we sort of take it from there. Because
Yeah.
well, we'll start with you, Amber, shall we? Because you kicked us off, and then we'll do a little circle after that.
So yeah, I had kind of a roundabout path, I would say. I think I wrote my first novel and finished it in 2016, which then I
Right.
queried unsuccessfully. And then I wrote two more books in 2017 and ended up kind of querying them one after another. And one of those books started to get some traction with agents, and I ended up getting an offer also from a UK agent, which is interesting. For some reason, the UK likes me more than the US, I think.
Okay.
And but then that book that I'd signed with Chloe with, that book ended up dying on submission, which is a very common thing that happens to books that doesn't get
Yeah.
talked about nearly as often
Yeah.
as it
Mm.
should. So I've already had
Absolutely.
several books die by the time we got to that point. And then the next book that, or actually, I apologize. Then Chloe left and I lost my agent, and we had to have a new agent replace her at the agency. So I'm already on my second agent, and I hadn't even sold any books yet. But that's my new agent. Then Hannah was able to sell The Secret Garden of Yunagian to a small press, Camcat Books in the United States. And so that was my debut that came out then in 2022. So I started writing in 2016. It was 2022 by the time that first book came out. And then shortly after that book came out, that agent left the agency. So I ended up at that point, I had no agent. And I went back to the trenches with a brand new book and tried to query again. And that's how I ended up getting with Harriet Illingworth, who is our shared agent.
Yes.
So I'm on my third agent at this point, even though I've never left an agent.
Goodness
They've
me.
all just disappeared into the ether.
Some people have all the luck. You've fallen it all for yourself.
Yeah.
How did
As
you
long as
fall
you're
in
not
with
dry.
Adam? How did you
Pardon,
fall in
was it
with
so?
Harry?
So I had a kind of roundabout way as well. I went through a lot of I wrote 3 books basically before the Dying Squad trilogy got published and before I signed with Harry. I mean, I racked up probably 150 rejections, I think, over
Good
those
Lord.
3 books. Yeah. I think that's the kind of the reality of writing or doing any creative endeavor. You have to get very intimate with rejection because it will come at you.
So I hear.
I mean, my life has prepared me well for writing in general, but you're going to get rejection at every turn.
Yeah, of
It's
course.
whether you can kind of keep power through it. You're going to be hacked off about it. But yeah, Harry was kind of the guy I wanted, I've got to say. Like I'd kind of followed him on Twitter and I knew the kind of things he seemed to be into. I thought he would like my writing. And he was doing a pitch evening at like a writers group. I wasn't part of the writers group, but I saw it advertised. So I went along and pitched him along with a lot of other people. I kind of like rehearsed it so I knew it off by heart. I didn't want to have to keep looking at the bit of paper. And then so when I came to submit a week or a few weeks afterwards, it was just a vague face to a name. He remembered me there, who remembered the pitch, and he'd liked the pitch at the time. And I think any kind of thing you can do just to give you a little bit of edge in submitting is you need to take it.
Right.
What about yourself?
You know what? What's interesting. I had a fairly frictionless experience with Justice of Kings. I've been writing for a very, 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 very long time, since my kind of early teens, and so Justice of Kings was just like another book for me. I'd written as a hobby for many years, and so I just, it was just another one. And I originally pitched it as a short story, the first what would become the first chapter, to I think it was Podcastle maybe, or Beneath Ceaseless Skies, or some small magazine, and they rejected it. And so I thought, well, I think this has got legs, and I wrote the novel, and I put it to one side, and I carried on writing other books. And I queried a couple of agents, and Harry was one of them, and he took it on, and it went from there very, very quickly, and Orbit preempted it after about 3 weeks, I think. And the rest is history. But what was more interesting about my experience, and that series has done very, very well. What was slightly more interesting, because that's not a very interesting story, but what's a more interesting story is I found it harder in some ways to get a deal after that initial success. I thought once you had a book deal and you were in, and you could pitch just about any old rubbish, and then someone would buy it. But what was interesting was my experience of rejection didn't really come until after I was a successfully published author. And my first pitch was for a sort of mermaid, merman, merpeople heavy story. I think mermaids they're coming back. I'm riding the wave on this. You heard it, they're
Everyone
big
needs a hill to die on.
I agree. This is mine. This and Alien Resurrection is a good movie. Those are I will fight viciously on those points. But I sort of pitched this mermaid thing, and my editors at Orbit were like, I don't know, man. I think this is the right direction for you. And I was like, guys, come on, like it's me. And anyway, so that got torpedoed, and I was like, so this is what it's like when things don't go your way. And I wrote a few other books, and one of them actually was a contemporary. I wrote a ton of books. I'm very prolific. I write full time, and I wrote a contemporary crime novel set in Sydney. And it was about one of the key conceits of the book was these shark attacks are happening, but there's very suspicious circumstances. It's a crime novel. There's very suspicious circumstances around the shark attacks, and I thought, wow, what a great hook! Like Harry's gonna love this. He hated it, right? And he hated it so much that he refused to pitch it to editors. I was like, come on, mate, like surely we've got to the point where you just send it off. You're basically a postbox at this point. And he wouldn't. He flat out refused to put his name to it. And I was like, wow, okay. So that went very badly. But having said that, but I have had, obviously I've sold a new trilogy to Orbit, which was a bit more in their wheelhouse. I had to sneak the mermaids in. So the last third of that book is very mermaid heavy, and so then book 2, which they haven't read yet, but I've already signed the contract, is like mermaids, bam, they're all over the place, so they're absolutely locked in, and there's nothing they can do about it, so that's fine. And I've got a sci-fi trilogy actually I've just sold as well, which I can't talk about yet. And a few other bits and pieces, but I was really surprised, for me personally, when I first got over that hill, because getting an agent feels like the in many ways the biggest milestone. I remember being more excited about getting an agent than actually getting a book deal, because I felt like after that it's a question of when, not if. But it was after that initial book deal where I started to kind of run into some resistance, and I'd written a few other books as well, and we'd pitched those to no avail. And I was like, God, what's going on? Like, guys, I'm in the club. Like, it's me, it's Richard. And we had there was a few months, so I began to sort of doubt myself a little bit. And I was like, God, maybe it was just a complete fluke. I'm pleased to say that evaporated very quickly, and I've had a tremendous amount of success since then.
That's upsetting.
So I'm sorry to say that, Adam. But there was a period where I was like, I was getting rejected left, right, and center, having had the deal. And that was a long, dark tea time of the soul, I think, for me.
Yeah, it's by a weird coincidence. The book that I wrote, the second novel I ever wrote that got me my first agent, was also about mermen and mermaids.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
And I still hold out hope that will get published someday. I
will.
might convert it to a novella because it was already kind of short, but yeah, the market's there, I think.
They're coming back.
Let's do it.
It's all trends. and it's Mermaids at the moment. You heard it here first.
I was definitely similarly naive on the agent thing. I thought
Mm,
it was just basically a cheat code, and once you got
yeah,
that, then yeah, you could write anything you want. You might not get a seven-figure advance every time, but
no,
you're definitely going to at least sell everything you write. That has been quite the wake-up call that that's not
yes,
quite the way it
no.
goes.
It's and what's been
And wake-up
interesting to
calls are
me.
very rarely good, aren't they? They're,
No,
they're
I don't
never
like
good
wake up
wake-up
calls.
calls.
No,
No,
I do with
no.
fewer wake up calls. It's interesting as well now existing in the industry and having been in it for about 3 or 4 years now. Um, that it it's becoming, I think, increasingly slavish to trends as well.
Hmm.
As sort of social media platforms take over a huge, not all of, obviously not the totality of, but a huge chunk of buzz and monopolizing kind of marketing budgets and things. And so you'll find and so what happens is books that people who use those social media platforms like TikTok, there are certain demographics that use TikTok, right? So people who read my books aren't really big on TikTok generally, like sort of serious, fairly dark fantasy. That's not like a kind of buzzy TikToky type trend. And so, but there are other books like and this is not to disparage any other genres, by the way, that romantasy, which are very buzzy, TikToky trends, and you do get these big kind of groundswells behind them. And so, what I've noticed, even in my short time, is a big pivot towards, books that do well on social media, or what they call the crate book now, which has become a genre in and of itself.
Hmm.
Books that are pitched or are pitchable to these crates, and this is much more of a thing in the UK than it is in the
I
USA.
was going to say, we
Um,
do have some in the US, but it is way bigger in the
yeah,
Okay.
UK from what it looks like.
it's well,
Yeah.
they've become, they've stitched up huge parts of the market now, like Illuma Crate and these special editions, because they'll sell 30, 40,000 copies out of the gate.
Wow.
Which no one's going to argue with those numbers. Now, whether people are reading the books is another question entirely. But they're selling the books, and that's the number that the publishers are interested in. And so I've noticed a big pivot to that side of the market as well, and away from and so you'll get these big cycles, as well. So romantasy is the current big cycle, right? A few years ago, it was Greek mythical retellings. They were all the rage. A few years before that, it was grimdark, fiction, sort of, Game of Thrones, Joe Abercrombie type thing. A few years before that, God knows what it was. I was a child then, but it was, and so I'm hoping Mermen is the next one.
Yes.
You're ahead of that trend, mate. So you
Yeah,
can be too far ahead of a trend, I think.
I'm too quick for it. Yeah, I agree. I
Yeah.
agree.
It,
But the
it sounds
trend,
like
the trend.
you all have an
So,
anthology in the works.
That's right.
yeah,
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, Adam, you
I
got a
need,
Merman
I need
story in
to
you,
get on
haven't you,
this
Adam?
bandwagon right at the start.
Mm,
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah,
I've
yeah.
So there's a
thought of
question
mermen,
in
but
the chat. Someone would like for you to elaborate on what a crate book is.
A crate book is so there are these subscription services in the UK now. It's a relatively recent phenomenon where you sign up, you pay a sum of money, it's usually like 20 quid a month, and these people will send you a book. You don't choose the book, they send it to you, and it's usually it's got sprayed edges and it's got maybe a different cover, and it's like a nice hardback edition which has been signed, to distinguish it from just the regular hardback or the paperback on the shelves. And so it is like a kind of book club that you pay for, and you get a very nice book out of it. And they are tremendously lucrative. And I know a guy who runs one called the Broken Binding. I know him very well, and and I'm quoting him here, more money than he knows what to do with, from these
wow.
subscription services. And I think because the UK is a much physically smaller country, and logistically, I think it's a much more permissive environment for these crate books. But what has now happened? I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot, so I'm going to stop in a minute. What has happened now is because these books sell so well, and because it is 30 or 40,000 books out of the gate for a lot of them, publishers, the dollar signs go in the eyes, and they have pivoted, and so the publishers are kind of pitching to these crate companies now and saying, "Oh, we've got the hottest new thing. Here you go, and you get a big sale." And it favors a certain type of um, so for example, recently there's been a lot of like sort of Southeast Asian or kind of East Asian type fantasy. That's done tremendously well in crate books, and so you're seeing a bit of an explosion in that subgenre of fiction. It might be like fairies, it might be dark romantasy, whatever, but those are the kind of genres it prefers. So that's a great book. And they have come to dominate the market in the UK.
I think, yeah, traditionally, the way it would have gone is you would have had a readership that kind of built up organically. So you would have two or three books released that may not have flown off the shelves, but a publisher would kind of put their time into building you up gradually. Now it's changed the dynamic of it, really, in that kind of everyone's trying to get in these crates. And I would have very happily killed everyone on this thread to get the Dying Squad in the crates. It wasn't really a thing at that time. But the potential problem is that you get one book in these crates and you get in the top 10 and it's brilliant. And then it kind of drops out a little bit. And the danger is that you can't then sustain a readership because, someone got sent this book and then as Richard says, they may or may not read it. And then you forget about it a little bit. So I think it's become harder to potentially sustain a career because you have these kind of flash in the pan books that go in and go out. But you've got 30 years to go, hopefully of maintaining a career. And I think that gets more and more difficult in this climate anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know what these guys think about that.
Amber, do you,
it is really interesting to hear because, like I said, it is different in the US. I mean, we do have, I think we call them book boxes is a more common term that we use here in the US. And my debut, The Secret Garden of Yunagi-en, did make it into a small book box. It was called Unplugged Book Box. But it was more of you get a book and then you get a bunch of like self-care products. So it's supposed to like help you should unplug from your, tech and go and burn your candle. And so it had like the book with like the sprayed edges and all that. And it came with like a little thing of matcha and like a matcha whisk and like a candle and lotions. And so it was like this whole little like care kit.
I quite like one of those.
So it was nice. But it's a little bit different. And I think it was like 1,000 books, not like the 30, 40 or
Oh, that's pretty, that's pretty normal. That's more common though. Illumicrate is the exception that proves the rule.
Okay.
That's a massive one.
Okay.
A more typical run would be between 1 and 5 or 10,000. Even 10,000 would be a huge run. I was in one with Goldsboro. You would have had a Goldsboro edition as well, didn't you, Adam?
I did. Yeah, mine was more limited, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, were you in a subscription box, or did you just get or did you get a special edition?
Yeah, just a special edition. Yeah.
Because I was in their fantasy subscription box, and that was what put me on the Sunday Times list ultimately, because it was like of the 2,000 or 3,000 sales in the first week, I think about half of those were Goldsboro, and without that, I wouldn't have made that list. And this is what I mean. And as Adam has just already correctly identified, it can be a bit of a double-edged sword. It's great for publishers. It's more of a double-edged sword for authors, because what can happen is, if you're like, a 25, 26-year-old, you've written quite a buzzy book, it's kind of fits into the zeitgeist, goes into Illumicrate. Oh my goodness, you've sold 30,000 books, incredible. Let's say 40% of the people actually read the thing and the rest just put it prettily on the shelf. Then what happens and then of those 40%, say 20% actually like the thing, because a lot of these books, and far be it from me to be a huge bitch about it, but like a lot of these books, they're not like high literature, right? They're kind of tropey, they're zeitgeisty, they're kind of they're hitting the trends rather than being Hemingway. And so what happens is you can get quite a precipitous drop off, where the publisher has sold on your behalf. You have sold 40,000 books, of which only maybe 10,000 people actually enjoyed the damn thing. And so and then, oh, look, your second book has come out. But of those 10,000, only maybe 7,000 actually buy it. And they didn't even buy it in the first week. And so what you see is this graph where you're like, oh, I'm a best-selling author. Oh, no, I'm in the abyss of authorship now.
I was going to ask you, Richard, with the fact that, so just your first book of the trilogy was in a box and then the others weren't, because it seems weird. Yeah,
The
how
whole
does that work
trilogy
when you have a
was.
trilogy? Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
they did do all three, but what they did, which annoyed me in perpetuity, was they did 2,000 for book one, but then they only did 750 for the second two books. And so I was like,
Okay.
well, and so and as Adam has already kind of alluded to, careers take time to build, right? Although they certainly used to when they put effort into building them. And so they weren't willing to play the long game and do 2,000 for each. And so now I've got, and so Justice of the Kings took a little bit of time to gather momentum, and then it did gather that momentum. But now you've got, but the Goldsmith didn't have the patience to kind of wait that long, and so they didn't do the other, 1,200 for the other two books. And so now I've got 1,200 people who will never be able to complete the set, which is really silly. Or maybe it was 1,250
Oh,
actually.
I
Maybe it
didn't think
was
about
1,000
that.
books.
Yeah,
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 so
yeah. They don't
anything was
match.
70. Yeah, so it's really
Uh,
silly. It was quite short-sighted, but anyways, by the by. But yeah, so these crates they kind of kill careers as much as make them. Because it's all for your publisher, it's all a numbers game. And if they see, oh, you sold 40,000, now you're barely selling, five, they won't renew your contract. And so, but people don't know that, of course. They see the big sales and they think, oh, fantastic,
Yeah, yeah.
crate. I would do the crate. Obviously, I would do it. You would. It's human nature. No one's going to say no to it, but
mm.
buyer beware almost. But there you go.
What was your debut experience like, Amber?
Well, my publisher is pretty small. So it is a small traditional publisher. So they didn't have like a huge marketing budget or anything like that. But so a lot of it I had to drive myself. I did my local library, obviously Johnson County Library, has been extremely supportive, and they have a very good annual writers conference, which I've been speaking at regularly for the past several years. And so I've always been able to kind of put myself out there through kind of tangential ways to then I was like, hey, guess what? I wrote a book. But I did get I was really pleased that I had an ebook, I had a paperback, I had a hardback, I had an audiobook. So they were able to get kind of like the full coverage. Oh, and large print even also. So I mean, CamCat did do well by me in a lot of different ways. And I felt like I had a lot more control than I think a lot of people have with the larger publisher experiences. Like I had a lot of input on the cover. We went back and forth multiple times where I saw drafts and I was like, oh, can we change this a little bit? Actually, you can see there's I made a big like poster of it.
There it is.
Mary has a copy.
Cool.
Yeah, so I really ended up really liking the cover, for example, and like the audiobook version, I was able to listen to audition tapes of the narrators and I got a vote. And so my top pick, Emily Ellett, did a really, really good job. So I felt like for being a debut with a small publisher, I felt like I had a pretty well-rounded experience, which, like my book launch was small. I put it on myself. But other than that, I obviously didn't have any big book tours or anything like that, but I am in local indie bookstores, I walk in and I sign my copies. And so it was a very good experience overall, for sure. Probably quite different from your guys's.
Yeah, I mean,
your third book's out now, right?
It is, yeah. The third book's out, third book's done, the trilogy's done. I mean, you get a lot of people whinging about the publishing experience, and I understand the whinges in some respects, but I kind of realized fairly early on that, it wasn't going to be what I envisaged in some ways. So it was up to me to kind of maximize every opportunity and potential that came through these books. And I did get a lot of opportunities through these books. And that was one of the great things about it. Ultimately, it was with a big five publisher, which does give you kind of perks in some ways. So I got to do a lot of festivals, which would be some people's idea of hell, but I love doing that sort of thing. I managed to do Comic-Con and quite a lot of the big ones. Did Harrogate because it's kind of half crime, half fantasy. So I kind of punched above my weight, I think, in terms of at one point it definitely felt like I'd done more podcasts than I'd sold books. It must have been pretty close. There can't have been a lot in it. Certainly done more festivals, certainly racked up more miles. But it led to other opportunities. Like I got a film agent, a screenwriting agent because of these books. and that's led to some really exciting things that unfortunately I can't talk about just yet.
Oh,
So I
fantastic.
guess it's kind of what you make of it, really. I
Yeah.
think, yeah, sure, that's going to be limited, but there's loads to get out of it. And on a basic level, I mean, I've had so many great friendships have come out about because of publishing and because of
Yeah.
books that people I would never have met otherwise because of this, and that means something. That isn't
Yeah.
a metric you can chart, but it's a great thing. It enriches your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's funny, isn't it? I think the older I get, the more I've come to just accept that nothing in life is ever as good as you think it's going to be. And it is true though. It sounds misanthropic to say, but it's true. Like I think, and that's for everything. Like nothing in life is as good as you think in your as it is in your head. And I remember, I think the last time I was truly genuinely like vibrating with excitement about publishing was when I got Harry, when I signed my contract with my agent. Um, but even things like, the day that my book came out, it's the process is so glacial. And I remember when we signed the contract with, Orbit, and it was a big contract with a ton of money, and so I was again really happy. And then I was like, I'm gonna get all this money in one big go. I'm gonna go and buy like Jaguar F Type or something, and then they were like, "Oh no, this you get a third of it up front or a quarter of it up front, and then you get the next three quarters are split by the three books, and then those quarters are split into three payments." And I'm like, "Oh right, so this is basically like minimum wage for the next 3 years." You know what I mean? Like, so every
Yeah.
opportunity is something is always just gently taking the wind out of your sails. And I think, and then of course, we got the deal, and that was wonderful for kind of a night, and then you very quickly get used to the idea. And then, I think publishing is very, very bad at managing expectations generally. And I think it's because no one wants to be up front and say, we are going to put 40% of our marketing effort into your series because we think it's good, but it's not like amazing. So it's going to be we're going to be pitching it at this level. You're not like our lead time. They can't say that, obviously, and therein lies the disappointment for a tremendous number of authors. And I've once seen happiness is defined as reality minus expectations, or maybe expectations minus reality, whichever way around it is. And I think, over the course of publishing, you think it's going to be X, Y, Z, and then you run headlong into the sort of the retaining wall of reality. And they're like, well, no, we're going to go in this direction. Oh, well, no, we're not going to, do that, blah, blah, blah. And I've been luckier than most. I have no reason to complain at all. But existing on various discords with a bunch of authors who have been treated very badly by the industry, or who haven't been treated badly, but who whose expectations were not met by the industry, which is partly their fault. Well, it's not fault, but it's partly their issue, and it's partly the industry's issue. So there's a lot of bad feeling in publishing, and I think everybody thinks they're going to be the big splashy debut, and not quietly released, in November on the mid list, and that crushes a lot of people's spirits because, of course, I always compare publishing a bit like to midwifery. If you've ever had a child, it's your child, it's your baby. Oh my goodness, this is the most precious thing in the world. To a midwife, you're like one of 10 that day. I've done 1,000 this year. You're nothing to me. You're just my job. I'm going to go home after this and have a cup of tea. And it's the same with books. You've worked on this thing for years. It's your precious, my precious artistic baby. Here it is. The publishing industry is like, yeah, great. I'm clocking off in an hour. See you later. And it's all different perspectives, of course, and those perspectives misalign sometimes dramatically. And so I think it's such a slow. I remember my publisher saying, "Oh, we're going to publish." So I signed my contract in like August 2020 or something, and they were like, "Great, we've missed the boat for 2021 now, so this will be a 2022 release." And I remember feeling absolutely crushed at the time. I was like, "Oh my God, what? Like 18 months? Like Jesus Christ, that's such a long time." Of course, I was, that proved to be the ultimate piece of good fortune because I completely missed COVID, where many debuts completely died on arrival. So that ended up being a good thing. But at the time, I was very angry. I was like, oh, come on, like, and of course, and I've just sold a sci-fi trilogy. The first book's not going to be out until 2026, which my youngest child will be 2.5. Which, when I start measuring it in my kid's age, and he's 5 months old now, and when I start measuring it in my kid's age, I think, Jesus, that is a long time. And it's a long time to lose enthusiasm and excitement for a project, I think. And so when the books are finally out, and they're like, oh, it's publication day.
Yeah, you barely remember writing the thing at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I finished edits on this
definitely.
like a year ago at least. You know what I mean? Mentally, I've completely moved on, and I don't want to sound like a miserable old crone, because it's a position of tremendous privilege. But I think it all comes down to the point. I remember I trained to be a lawyer. I'm a litigator by trade, or I was. And there are so many hurdles, professional hurdles, academic hurdles, and then you finally get there, and you're sat in a nice office in London, and you look around and you think, is this it? Is it? It took me 6 years to get here, and this is it. And I think it's the same with publishing. It's kind of like you work so hard to get to it, and then you're in it, and then you're like, okay, now what? And so it's
I think that's always the fatal contradiction, because you need the hunger for like what's next, because that hunger will get you through when you just can't write, or you're struggling to write, and all the disappointment, all the rejection. You need that hunger, but also the hunger never leaves you alone. And so there is that case of kind of, you're never really happy. I had a meeting today and said, right, I'm going to allow myself this day of happiness, because it was hard to get this meeting. It's very difficult to get this meeting. So you're going to enjoy that fact. But I know when I wake up tomorrow, you're thinking about I'm be thinking about the next thing.
You've already moved on.
A few hours of peace. Yeah.
That's why I really like to celebrate every single stinking victory that I can get, so if I'm like, okay, now I'm out on submission with the book, I'll like get like a tiny little bottle of like sparkling sake or something and be like, yay, because that might be the last time you get to celebrate that book. If that book doesn't end up going anywhere, then at least I got that far. And then so every little step. So I like to get lots of little sparkling bottles of things, just so that you can get a sense of, hey, even if this never ends up going somewhere, I did a thing, and I get to be happy about it for now.
This is Amber's way of telling us that she's an alcoholic. I search for excuses to drink constantly, is what I'm hearing, Amber.
There's a question in the chat. Benjamin wants to know how you balance writing for the market with writing for yourself and what you enjoy, like Mermaids.
Well, I would say Harry is actually really useful with this, and Adam and Richard, you have to chime in if this is a process you use with Harry or not. But when I'm thinking about writing a book, before I even start anything with it, I write up a series of pitches and I send them to Harry and I say, okay, do any of these seem like they would be marketable? Because I will come up with some bonkers ideas that Harry's just like, I'm sorry, no, that's not going to, nobody wants that, Amber. Okay. I mean, he's much nicer and more British about it than that. But eventually, so then he will tell me, okay, this idea I think would probably be your best bet, or maybe these two. And then I'll go back and I'll write like a sample. Like I sent him just last week, the first like 16,000 words of a new novel. And I sent him that, and I sent him a really detailed outline of the whole book so he can read that. And then at that stage, I get another reality check of, is this actually marketable? And if not, and he has said no before, then I will pitch that and then, or, throw it away, and then I will work on something else. So I get to still put out my wacky ideas, and then Harry just kind of helps navigate towards something that other people might also enjoy. So I really don't think about the market. I don't think about, what genre I think is going to be, really popular, but I have that reality check with Harry, who knows the market way better than me. He's always talking to the editors, etc., and networking. So that keeps me on a reasonably marketable track, I hope.
Yeah, I do the same. I do think as a general rule, you can't really write to the market too much, because what the market is now, it isn't going to be when you finish your book. It's also like, you've got to live with this thing for potentially 2 or 3 years when you're writing it. You've got to love it. You can't be writing it in a cynical sort of way, because one, the book will be rubbish, and two, you're gonna just feel dirty at the end of it. Especially if it doesn't sell. And there's nothing worse than being a sellout and then the thing doesn't sell. That's like the worst of all worlds. So I think you've got to write it from a position of passion, and like you're the person that has to tell this story. And I think loads of hits, loads of things that are broken out have done that because there's nothing else like it.
Yeah.
So it's getting that balance of like having something that feels genuinely fresh, and that isn't going to scare the normals too much, I guess.
I agree. I think the answer to the question, how do you write to market, is you don't, and you can't, and you shouldn't. There's a difference between, writing to trend, which is impossible, and to be avoided at all costs, unless you can turn out a book in a month. And writing is a slightly difference between writing to trend and writing to market. And I think writing to market is, sort of, as Amber has identified, is more about, is this book commercial enough to secure a contract, publishing contract, right? Because publishers, they don't want necessarily really quirky, weird stuff, because they've always got an eye on the bottom line, and so it's got to be the phrase I hear all the time is familiar but different. They want they want to hit the big notes that any reader can get into, but it's got enough of a hook to sort of set it apart from everything else, or not everything else, but a lot of other things on the market. But I totally agree with Adam. I think you have to write the book you want to write. Everything else be damned. That's got to be your prime directive. And of course, if you write the thing that you want to write and you're interested and passionate about it, that will be the best possible thing you can write, and then it'll be a good book. And then just being a good book makes it commercial. That's half the battle, is just good writing. I wrote the book I mentioned earlier, the Shark Attack book. I loathed writing it. I told my wife about it, and she said, "Oh, you must write this book. It's an excellent idea." And I said, I hated it. I've always been a science fiction and fantasy writer, and I wrote this contemporary crime novel, and I detested it. And it's a bit dramatic to say this, and it's probably also not true, but it was one of the worst experiences of my life. I was dragging my way through this book for months, and I would hate sitting down at the writing desk. And I was convinced it was an excellent novel and that it would sell well. It did neither. But I hated writing it because I wasn't passionate about it, and I wasn't interested in writing it. And I really, really loathed that experience. And I'd vowed to myself I would never do that again. I'd always just write for myself. And so when I go to Harry, I say, "Harry, here's a book I've written. Go and sell it." And sometimes he does, and sometimes he doesn't. I'm pleased to say more often than not he does. But I always write for myself first. So I didn't even pitch Harry ideas. That's not to say that's the right approach, but it's just the way I do things. And I say, "Here's the book I've written," or I'll say, and I just present it as a fait accompli. Here it is. See what you can do with this. And we have sold, a bunch of stuff. But I think as soon as you start sort of pitching, and it depends what you want as well. Like, if you want, some people are like, I really just want like a big hit, or I really just want a contract. I want another series. I want like a commercial book. I want to sell something. Then that's absolutely the way to do it. Pitch a bunch of ideas. Which one, in your opinion, because he's getting paid for his advice, right? That's his job. Part of his job is to sell books. So, obviously leverage his ideas and what he thinks. But but if you just have a book in you and you just have to get it out, and I'm not like the dying artist trope at all, but and that's the other end of the spectrum. And I think there's probably a happy medium somewhere in the middle. But my experience, I can write 3 or 4 books a year because I do it full time now. So I churn one out and I say, "Right, Harry, here you go," and off he goes and does his thing, or he'll tell me to fuck off.
I do think it's good. I think you need one that you struggle with occasionally. I think it's a good palate cleanser, particularly if you're writing a series. I always wrote something in between the Dying Squad books.
Right. How interesting.
To try something different, and just I wanted to miss the characters. And I think the danger if you're writing a series and you don't write anything in between. And it could be anything, it could be a script or anything. I want to miss the characters. I don't want to be turning up each day thinking, oh, these fuckers again. Like, when will he do something interesting?
Oh God, demanding my attention.
Exactly.
I think that's why I haven't had any interest in writing a series. Everything that I've ever written has been a standalone. And I think it's because by the time I'm done with it, I'm just like, I don't want to see those people again, for a long time.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe the idea just hasn't struck me yet, but have you guys written standalones as well? Or is it always, well, I guess your shark one there, Richard, that was a
Well, yeah, that died a death.
But it didn't
that was
go
dead on
well.
arrival. It might. I'm convinced I'm right and Harry's wrong. I'm sure it's destined for great things. I've written one standalone. It was a post-apocalyptic novel, and I was really pleased with it. And it's actually what got me a foot in through the door with Tor. And we signed a contract for what ended up being something else. But they said, well, we might publish this. But that's the only one. I've always written series. I love series. And in some ways they're not a great thing to write in many ways, because if you're not a fast writer, if your first book comes out and it doesn't do well, you're locked into that series whether you like it or not, and with the way the contracts are drafted with the non-competes and the first option and first refusals and whatever, you've got to finish the bloody thing before you can write anything else anyway. So they can be a bit of a millstone, around the neck if it doesn't go well, which is why I like, and this is why I often will write a whole series before the first book is even out, or at least the first 2 books of it. So then if it doesn't, do well, at least I'm not yoked to that, second or third book for the next 3 or 4 years of my professional, career. But the problem with series is even the most popular ones, they have drop off between books.
Yeah.
And so, and sometimes precipitous drop-offs, even very good books and very good series. And so the benefit of it is it has a long tail. So you could be selling books 2 and 3 for decades to come. And that's the good thing about it. And the first book is effectively like a marketing exercise for the rest of the series. But the bad thing about it is if your first book doesn't do well, again, it can kill your career momentum as well. So there's many pitfalls in publishing, I'm realizing as I'm speaking.
It's one area in which things have changed a lot since I got signed. Because when I got signed, like Harry and Mark, it was everyone wanted series. Everyone wanted to build a series. But then when it came to me submitting the next thing, they definitely did not want series. They want standalones.
Right.
And standalones are an advantage in that if you don't connect with the standalone, the first one, then you've got a completely different story with a completely different set of characters. You get a fresh hit, which I mean, I guess I suffered in the way that you mentioned. The first book did okay, but it didn't do great, and so the publisher kind of then. I hesitate to words who give up, but they kind of do sort of give
they
up
do
on
a bit, don't they? Yeah.
So it's up to you to kind of like push it as much as you can and get what you can out of it. I've got to say, I know some people have really struggled to finish the series because they know the readership isn't there particularly. I didn't at all. Like I just thought, well, I don't know the next chance I'm going to get to write a trilogy, so I'm going to make them as good as I can. And it never killed my enjoyment or in that respect. Thankfully, but it must be, and if you're writing loads of them, it must be a slog, I think, sometimes.
So Amber, what are you working on at the moment then? Have you got a green light for a project?
Well, I'm waiting to hear back from Harry about the sample that I sent just last week. So that's the one that I'm kind of hovering on. I am still pushing forward and writing it just because I don't want to sit around and twiddle my thumbs, I guess. I like to write, and so I'm going to continue writing. And it's quite different from my debut. It's a near future idea, but written more for a mainstream audience, but it's looking at the technological singularity. So the idea that eventually AI is going to become so developed that it can reproduce itself and develop itself and basically just explode into a technological future that we don't understand. So it's kind of introducing that concept to like a lay audience is the broad idea. So I'm hoping that it sounds good to Harry. So
Very topical. Very
we'll
nice.
see. Yeah, it
Yeah,
involves a
yeah.
lot of research though, because
I
I mean
bet.
it's a topic that I've kind of kept up on over the years, but it's constantly changing, and I already have this fear
Sure.
that okay, even if Harry says yes, go ahead and write this, and if I magically get it done by the end of the year, and then he reads it and blah blah blah, then we're in 2025. Already,
Mm,
a lot of the stuff I've written is going to be outdated. I'm like, I'm going to be editing this thing up until the very end because I'm
sure.
projecting out into the future and I'm
Down
trying
to
to
the
throw
wire. Yeah.
things. Exactly. I'm going to need to have
Yeah,
like an
yeah.
author's note that says, I'm sure this is all outdated by the time you're reading this book, and just leave it at that.
It's like you'll read sci-fi in like the first half from the first half of the 80s, and they haven't got CDs yet, or and so they'll have like it'll be a book set in like 2100, but they'll still have like big VHSs and cassettes and stuff, and you're like, if only you'd waited 2 more years, you would have got over
Oh,
the line.
I just finished reading. I read aloud to my kids still, even though they're teenagers. And I just finished reading Running Man, Stephen King, aloud to
Oh,
my
I
son, and
love
that's
that
from the
book.
80s.
Yes.
But it is
Yeah, yeah.
so, I mean, it's set like in 2025, I think is the
That's
year. And
right.
my son is just laughing at all the ridiculous guesses and what's so wrong. And
That's
it's
right.
delightful. Yeah. So
Yeah,
it'll be
that's the
my book
pitfalls of
in 30
sci-fi.
years, I'm hoping.
That's right. Yeah, it will be comically out of date in a decade. I'm
Yep.
certain of it. Yeah. I saw
Yep.
the other day because I was invited to I self-published some sci-fi years ago. And it's got spaceships and lasers and fighting all the rest of it. And I saw the other day, and I was writing it, and I was like, you know what? I'm convinced that if there's ever a spaceship, like a combat spaceship, that's designed to kill other, that it will not be crewed. There will not be a human aboard. There'll be no need for them, and they'll just slow everything down. They won't. The machines will be able to. They'll be able to do it so much more efficiently. But I'm going to put people in it anyway because it's fiction, and if we can't relate to it, then it's not interesting. And then I was asked to write an article recently about the technology that I had made up for the series that I had envisaged there being. It was an article about materials and in material science, and I think on the same day, and so I was like, oh yeah, you know what, I've got this like nanoform armor and this kind of non-Newtonian, gel fluid and blah blah all this kind of stuff, thinking myself very clever. And then I think it was the day after someone had posted and it was like, this is a photo of the sun. And what you are looking at is the neutrons being emitted from the sun. And the photo was taken through the Earth. So basically, from the night side of the Earth, they had taken a photo of the sun through the planet. And I was like, my God, like everything over it is just garbage. Like this stuff is light years. Like we're already ahead of what I've written. Like now, let alone in 200 years. Like it's impossible to envisage. Oh my goodness.
We've got a question in the chat about writer's block. Do you get it? And how do you get over it?
Well, I'm a
Ah,
big outliner, so I never get writer's block because I already have a very detailed outline before I
Mm,
start anything. And so at that point, it's almost like writing an essay. It's like I have everything figured out and I'm just like filling it in. But I have very, very rough first drafts. And so it requires a lot of editing to get them anywhere. But it does mean that, yeah, when I sit down to write, I have a little blurb off to the side. I'm like, this is what I'm writing today. And then I write it that day. So
Hmm.
it may not be the most exciting. I mean, I've heard some people say that if they had an outline, it would no longer be enjoyable to write, but I don't find that. I like the security of knowing this is exactly what I'm writing, and I just sit down and write it, and I'll make it pretty later. So,
Hmm.
I'm really irritating when it comes to writer's block. I just don't agree it exists as a concept. It's like it's like it's a luxury for if you're Stephen King, you've earned the right to writer's block. If you're the rest of us, you just have to get your ass in the chair and keep writing. And it might be rubbish what you write, but I guarantee you can get something out of it. It'll
mm.
shoot you in an idea that you don't, in a way you didn't think before. There will be some merit in what you've written by the end of the day, even if what you think is writing is complete rubbish. So I think you just have to get on with it. I'm very
Just
I'm
power
very
through.
brutal, I'm afraid, when it comes to writing.
Mm.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
yeah, I my sort of the adage is you can edit a bad page, you can't edit a blank one. And
yeah, yeah.
I agree. I mean, ultimately, the only way to write a blog is to just keep writing, no matter if you think it's hot garbage. I definitely, I'm the same as Amber. I love plotting novels, and I have like an Excel spreadsheet, like it's got the chapters, and I've got like PowerPoints and maps, and I love all that stuff. And I absolutely, anyone who says that takes sort of the the art is rubbish. Like, absolutely, it's perfectly valid. Like I plot them to within an inch of their lives, and I love that process. It's a huge part of the enjoyment of the process for me.
Same.
Yeah, right. Like, and you'll get, and people will get quite snobby about it, and they'll say, "Oh, it's not true art unless you've just kind of, vomited it out on the page, and oh, I'm gonna cut open my wrists and here's my art." Nonsense. Like it's just a different way of approaching the same thing. But more practical advice. There's two things. Going for a walk there's something about the act of going for a walk through the local park, which will, I swear to God, 99 times out of 100 will unlock whatever the plot jam is. It's magical, and that has worked for me almost every single time. The second one is have a shower. Weirdly,
Yep.
I find myself in the shower at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm in the shower, just washing away, and then something will just appear. Those are my two hot tips. Walk or shower. Never the twain shall meet. But that's for me. But yeah, funny enough, the only times I've ever struggled is when I haven't plotted out what I'm going to write, and I'm just sat there like I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, I need the plan on the page, even if it's just this is what needs to happen in this chapter and it's a bullet point. That's enough. But I need something on, a second Word document that I can draw and be working towards. I need some sort of plan. But yeah, Sharon.
I'm split on it. I'm on in write but for novels, I'm a pantser, and I enjoy that. Sometimes it creates problems for you, but I enjoy it. But for scripts, I'm a complete planner because you kind of have to, because when you go on submission with a script, it's a little bit different from the book in that you'll have to have the pilot episode written. Right. And like really, really tight. But then you have this whole kind of show Bible you have to put together for it. And you have to show where it's going, how many episodes are going to be, how long those episodes are going to be. You have to be really tight. And so that's something I've kind of done as I've gone on. And I do definitely see the merits of it. And it never really takes away the excitement of it, because when you sit down to write it, it goes in a different direction a lot of the time anyway, and that's the kind of the buzz of that is the same as if you're pantsing, I think, really.
Sure.
So I'm a late adopter to planning. I am.
Right. I will I pants a few things, but sometimes when I just take the wheels off and let it roll, but I end up with all sorts of problems. I'm like, oh, what have I done? Like, I've written myself into some serious corners. It's not worth it. And I hate deleting stuff. I hate it. The maximum I've ever had to take out is about 7,000 words in a book, and it killed me. It's like a whole chapter and a half, and I was like, oh God. So
do you have another file that you put the stuff that you cut into?
Of course.
I have. Mine's called holding tanks, because graveyard's even too dire for
too
me.
final.
So and okay. I will do a sentence. I'm like, I got to get rid of the sentence, and I'll move a single sentence over. I do actually pull things out of it from time to time. Yeah. So not very often, but just knowing it's there kind of helps my writer heart, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Well, I have to come and be the heavy. I always feel so mean, but
hatchet.
Because I get to control what happens, I have one last question that I want to ask you. Like, I know very well how Amber engages in literary citizenship. Like, when Amber says the library, Johnson County Library, has been very supportive of her work. Well, it goes both ways. Amber's been leading book discussions about the craft of writing, volunteering to do that for our patrons, and she'll do it again at the Writers' Conference. And I'm wondering, how do you, Adam and Richard, engage with your writing community, or do you? Are you kind of private about your writing? I know, Adam, you said you go to book festivals and stuff like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm in the fortunate position now where I've got kind of quite a lot of friends that are writers, and I often send them, some opening chapters to see whether it's working for them or not, which is a really fortunate position to be in. but yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a vital thing. I know writing is a solitary act, right? Even when you're working on TV, you know, you most of the time you're doing it on your own, certainly in Britain. So I think it's really important to have a bit of a kind of tribe and community of other writers. You know, it makes life a lot easier and much more enjoyable if you've got that kind of collective.
I've gone to a few cons out here in Australia, and I went to WorldCon in Glasgow in August just gone, and I try to make myself available. Generally speaking, I discourage kind of parasocial relationships because you know, I don't have the time or energy for that. And some people will kind of latch onto you on social media and like, you know, and they'll DM you and stuff. And I always, if it's getting a bit too much, I'll just ignore it for a little while. But I do respond to everything I get. You know, I get messages fairly frequently. You know, I'd say at least one every couple of days. And I think it's you know, you've got to, you don't have to, but with semi-public figures, you know, demi public figures, and I think it's, you know, you chose commercial publication as something you wanted to do, and that comes with benefits and obligations. And I think, you know, whenever you see like a, and I wouldn't for a moment consider myself the peer of a Hollywood actor, let's be clear about that. But when you see Hollywood actors saying, oh God, the press junket, it's such a nightmare, you know, and you think, oh God, my heart bleeds, you know, you have to talk about your movie for, you know, a couple of days. And I think when you are in the privileged position, the lucky position of having books published, you know, the least you can do is engage with your the people who've read it and enjoyed it, even if it means a bit of a, you know, retweet here and there or whatever. Yeah, you know, I go into bookshops and I'll sign the books and, you know, meet people at cons, and I go into the library every now and then and put my head through. Yeah, I enjoy that side of it for sure. Even if sometimes it gets a bit tedious and annoying. I think that's just the price you pay for existing in a public space. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Totally agree with that.
Yes. All right. Well, we have some thank yous in the chat. It was such an honor to learn from each of you, and I'm so thankful you took time to spend with us. I admire all of you. Thank you so much. Another thank you. So lots of appreciation in the chat. Yes, thank you all. If you're in Kansas City, Amber will be joining us on November 15th at the Writers Conference, and the recording of this conversation will be on Library on Demand through Johnson County Library's website within a few days. All right.
Excellent. Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much.